Welcome back to Pictish Shorts and episode 4. Pictish Shorts is the new podcast from the Pictish Art Society. It's the podcast where we introduce you to some of the people who rock the Pictish world by asking them the same 5 questions and hoping we get some different and interesting answers. Now, our first 3 episodes have been watched more than 1,000 times so far, so thanks for all the attention and support. Now, our guest for episode 4 is archaeologist, National Museum of Scotland curator, blogger and author, Adrian Maldonado. And Adrian is the author of Crucible of Nations. If ever there was a book we could describe as beautifully illustrated or even lavishly illustrated, this is it. It's a book covering the twilight of the Pictish Age and the rise of the Kingdom of Alapa. Adrian, thanks for joining us. Please tell us a little bit about your current projects.
Pleasure to be here. Thanks for the invite. It's good to be in on the ground floor of this enterprise, so it's an honor, truly. I'm at the National Museum of Scotland now. I have been since 2018, and I'm loving every minute that I'm there. At the moment, recently, after Crucible of Nations, I moved on to the Galloway Hoard project, which was funded by the HRC. That's been a lot of fun. And then currently, I'm on a new initiative that the National Museum is working on. It's the Scottish Archaeological Human Remains Collection. So we're finally making the collection of human remains held by the National Museum transparent. And we've hired the first ever curator of osteoarchaeology. So a lot of exciting things are going on, and it's a really different, really cool new project.
You just can't get away from death and burial, can you?
Yeah. Ever since the PhD, it's been kind of there and back again.
Fantastic. Well, let's get straight into our questions. Right. First one. What first got you interested in the Picts?
I was always kind of a nerdy medieval guy, so I did medieval history as an undergraduate, but it wasn't really clicking for me, history, until I came to Scotland on a semester abroad. I went to St. Andrews University in 2003, just for a semester, and actually being there amongst the medieval streets, the medieval cathedral ruins, the castle ruins. I went to the Scottish border abbeys at that point as well, and that was it. I was hooked. And at that point, I was done with history, and I moved into archaeology. So I finished my undergraduate degree in history and applied to come back to Scotland for medieval archaeology. And at that point, the best program was at Glasgow University. They had a medieval archaeology degree, a master's degree. And at that point, I still thought I was going to do castles, cathedrals, ruins, late medieval stuff. But the dream team at Glasgow Uni at that point was Stephen Driscoll, Ewan Campbell, Colleen Beatty, Jeremy Huggett, all early medievalists, by specialism. And once I started getting into medieval archaeology, it was very clear that it was early medieval archaeology that was much more interesting. And at that point, I had never heard of the Picts. I was interested in Scottish medieval archaeology, maybe medieval churches, cathedrals, but more and more interested by what came first. And you're into the Pictish period, and I never looked back.
Fantastic. It's fascinating, particularly to hear from people who come from Firth of these shores, how they encountered the Picts and Pictish arts. So wonderful. Okay, next question. What do you find most fascinating about the Picts now?
I mean, the Picts are having a moment, aren't they?
Yeah, they are.
It's you can feel it in the air. It's a really exciting time to be studying this stuff for all these different reasons. Me personally right now, I was really interested in Pictish Christianity for a long time since my PhD, which was on sort of Christian burial in Scotland. And I thought that would always be the thing. But when I joined the museum in 2018, it was specifically to study their Viking Age collection. So anything from the 8th to the 12th century was fair game for the book that was eventually called Crucible of Nations. And at that point, I begin really doing a deep dive into, the last days of the Picts. And I find that actually a lot of work on Pictish archaeology kind of dries up around 800. People kind of lose interest because some of the key monument types, the monasteries, the hill forts, the Pictish symbol stones, they all kind of start to dwindle by about the year 800 and certainly by 900. And so that kind of ending is left a little bit hazy. At that point in the 9th century, archaeologists who are working on this stuff tend to be focused on the northern and western Isles and the Viking occupation, the Viking burials, longhouses, and settlements. And so there's a weird gap in the middle where there's not a lot of people looking at the rest of Scotland in the 9th century. And so that ending of the Pictish period, it really needs a lot more eyes on it, really, in terms of the archaeology, in terms of the dating. What's the last Pictish stone? We don't actually know how long they're putting up cross slabs. We know that the symbols seem to go out of use in the 9th century, but for how long do we still get your sort of typical Pictish style monuments even after we stop hearing about the Picts? Do they still keep carving these stones? And I think there is a lot more to be fleshed out there. So I just think the 9th, 10th centuries, the beginning of Alba, the end of the Picts, that really needs a lot more eyes on it.
I completely agree. I mean, I'm at Maniki, and my local monument is the Camas Cross. It's just sort of post-Pictish. I mean, a lot of the old books described it as Hiberno-Norse. I wouldn't. But it's just in that hazy time when people don't really get their head around it very well.
There's a lot of potential for discovery.
Yeah, absolutely. Okay, next one. What's your favorite stone or artifact?
Now I've heard now by the time you get to like episode 20 or 30 of this, you're going to get a lot of repetition, or people are going to be like,
That's okay.
Because I think we all have kind of the same ones at the end of the day. But I've thought about this, and I'm not going to choose a stone. I'm going to cheat.
Okay.
I'm going to say that my favorite Pictish object isn't a carved stone. It's actually an artifact. And this comes out of the research I did at the museum. There's this brilliant hoard of brooches called the St. Ninian's Isle Hoard. It's buried in a box in the floor of a church on a nice little island in Shetland. Unbelievable sight, really dramatic place to go visit. And the hoard itself is on display in the National Museum in Edinburgh. In amongst that hoard, all these brilliant brooches, bowls, parts of swords, intriguing silver objects. There's one brooch in particular that kind of stands out for me. There's one brooch that looks the same size and material, silver with a little bit of gold on top, a little bit of gilding on top. Same size, same format as all the rest of them, except the ends of the brooch are different. There are two animal heads, they're two beast heads. They look like dragons roaring at each other across the opening of that brooch. That one is really significant because there's very few examples of brooches that end in those beast head terminals facing one another across the gap. Very few. And where they're found, they tend to be in northern Scotland. So there's one from Fresick Links in Caithness. There's the mold for making one of these from the Broch of Bursay in Orkney. And so basically this looks like specifically a northern variation of that Pictish brooch. But what's really great about it, what really makes me love it even more, is that it's this type of brooch that when the Vikings come over, this is the one that they really take a shine to. Now, obviously, they didn't get their hands on the one from St. Ninian's Isle. That one stayed safely buried in the church, but they must have seen others because from the 9th and into the 10th century, the Vikings in Norway start to make their own penannular brooches. At first, they're just copying the Pictish ones and the Irish ones that they've seen. And it's these penannular ones with the beast heads, which are pretty rare in Pictland now. Those are the ones that they start to copy in big numbers. And so there's a couple of these still surviving in Viking graves in Norway, and they start to make them with Scandinavian styles of art. So they begin to adapt them to like local tastes. But I love that there's this fashion, there's this object that was once foreign and in the Viking Age becomes a badge of, how widely you've traveled. And it's the penannular brooch that gets adopted as one of these sort of, colonial fashions. But it's the one with the animal heads, the beast heads in particular, which they really kind of take a shine to and then make their own. That one survives in more, there's more examples, I think, in Norway of those beast-headed brooches now than survive in Pictland still. But we can see in the St. Ninian's Isle one that it certainly predates the Viking Age. So there's a good example of an object that kind of transcends the Pictish period, that becomes influential even in the other direction. We always think of the Vikings coming over here and destroying the Picts.
Yeah.
Here's an example of a Pictish idea, a Pictish fashion that became influential back home.
Setting the trend. That's a brilliant answer. Thanks very much. Yeah. Okay, straight on to question 4. If someone could only visit one site or museum, which one and why?
This one's impossible.
Yeah.
It's actually impossible, this one. Honestly, You can't make us choose. I was thinking a lot about this. I thought maybe I would go for something personal. The first museum with Pictish stones I would have seen was St. Andrews. I don't think that's open to the public at the moment.
It's
The
not.
St. Andrews sarcophagus and the cross slabs and the dozens of other stones. An incredible collection. I don't think it's available now. So I could put in a good word for my employer, the National Museum.
Yeah.
It's been recommended before, but I think in my heart, it has to be the collection of stones at Meagle. It just has to be. Meagle is like nothing else. And it's in the old schoolhouse right next to the church, right next to where all these stones were found. The collection of Pictish stones that you get there is so vibrant and quirky and weird, from the giant sort of monumental Meagle 1 and 2 to the creatures chasing humans, devouring humans, like creatures from hell chasing people around. I love that this is the sort of the Pictish version of Christianity. The Pictish vision of Christianity was seemingly very preoccupied with hell and damnation and, salvation through the cross, and you can see that viscerally in the collection of Meagle. And so it's got to be there.
Yeah, it's hard to beat Meagle, isn't it? And we had a chat with Victoria Whitworth about Meagle, and she nominated Meagle 27, that fabulous fragment with the guy teetering
Yeah.
on his chair. And it is a weird, weird stone.
To be
It's
honest,
a wonderful
if I
thing.
had to, that is a bizarre one. If I had to choose one, though, I think it would be. There's one in particular that looks like an architectural piece. It's not a cross slab. It's not a recumbent. It's kind of thicker on top than it is on the bottom, and it's got a bear in really quite high relief with its claws sort of cutting into the edge of the slab, and then in the middle, or may have been the center, there's a person with fish tails,
Yeah.
and their hand is sort of grasping the tangle of their hair. And that has been interpreted in all these different ways. Maybe it's a pre-Christian deity, maybe it's a mermaid, but the fact is that's a completely mysterious stone. And it fits in with the Pictish art carving style. So we know that it belongs to the rest of the collection. But I think it's got to be, well, maybe the lintel over a doorway of what would have been the church that these stones maybe belong to. It's possible. But the fact that it's got such weird imagery on it means that, a Pictish stone church would have maybe looked a little weirder and a little stranger than maybe churches anywhere else.
It's carved in such deep relief as well, isn't it? And plainly been underground for quite a long time. Probably quite soon after it was carved, I would think, because it's not very badly worn at all. But it is a wonderful object. That brings us to, well, we're talking about wonderful objects. The last question, which is, which lost stone or fragment would you most like to find? Now, this was my question. I know it's a stinker, right? But it's because, we spend so long looking at Pictish objects, and so often the bit that would explain what's going on, like Meagle 4, with that incredible missing section in the middle, the bit that would give you some hope of deciphering the rest of it is invariably missing. It seems to be the Pictish law of missing objects. But anyway, have a go at that one for us, Adrian. Which lost stone or fragment would you most like to see found?
I mean, the rest of that lintel at Meagle would be a good choice, but it's not the main choice. And again, I think I'm going to cheat here and choose an object rather than a carved stone. There's this incredible object that we have a drawing of that doesn't survive. It's from Montefieth, and Montefieth in Angus has an incredible amount of sculpture from the church site there, but it's also got a hill fort above it, and we don't know if that's been occupied in the early medieval period or not. It needs more work. And the plaque that comes out of it that we have a drawing of is in the shape of a crescent, from the crescent in V-Rod. And it's got this sort of interlaced design carved into it. It's meant to be a copper alloy plaque, and I think not very big either. Maybe just about the right size to be kind of worn as a badge, but it doesn't have suspension holes. At least they're not depicted in the one drawing that we have of it. And so it's actually really enigmatic. It's a metal version of a Pictish symbol. And then the other interesting thing about it, well, first of all, we don't have these metal versions of these Pictish symbols. We have symbols carved into metal on the silver chains, for instance, and on the Norreys Law plaques. But we don't have these sort of metal versions of symbols elsewhere. And the other thing that's interesting about it is that it's got Norse runes etched into it. And so at the point that it was lost, it had been taken off the hands of whoever made it, the Picts, I guess, who used it in a way that we still don't understand, and was then signed by a Norse speaker who was given it, had stolen it. And, the easiest thing to do is say, well, this is loot. This is a loot from a sort of Viking raid on a church at Montefieth or nearby. They've taken this, whatever that object was doing, as a bit of treasure. But I think the more interesting thing is, what if this was, the remains of a treaty or of an agreement, and we have these really spectacular one-off objects surviving in things like the Galloway Hoard. These are sort of unique objects that are one of ones that don't survive anywhere else. And these are the objects that are reserved for these, gift exchanges, the inauguration of kings, the baptism, and sort of consecration of bishops. These are the kind of gifts that are made at those big occasions. So I wonder if this isn't the remnants of a sort of agreement, land sharing agreement or something that comes out of that sort of Viking raid. But that's just me sort of speculating. That's the object I'd like to see resurface one day.
I think it's a great choice, and not only because I can pretty much see the site from my house. It's very, very local to me, and thank goodness we got that drawing.
Yeah, it's an unbelievable thing. I'd like to see what, if any, kind of use wears on it. Like, was it held up? Was it suspended in some way? Was it mounted? Is it part of a shrine? Or are they sort of applying these metal plaques onto Pictish stones? I mean, there's no gap. There's no sort of empty crescent where it would have been set onto any stone. And so it's a complete mystery, but it really kind of speaks to, it kind of gives a hint about kind of what happened in those last dying days of the Picts.
Yeah, I did some, amateur research trying to find out what happened to it through the local, the family that had the farm and things like that. And a couple of different stories. One that it went with a descendant to Australia, a son of the farm. Another that it really was in such bad condition anyway, it eventually fell apart in an envelope and was essentially, dust by the time it was disposed of. I don't think we'll ever know. But like I said, thank goodness we got that picture.
To all of our listeners in Australia,
keep an eye out.
Check your attic.
Absolutely. Particularly if your forebears came from this part of the world. Have a look in that old chest that's in the loft.
Definitely.
Well, listen, that's been great fun, Adrian. Thanks very much. And some cracking answers, including, as I say, from a site that I can pretty much see from the upstairs windows of my house. So fantastic. Thanks for letting us know what you're up to just now. Thank you.
Okay, thank you.